Joining us now, New York Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC News political analyst Peter Baker, national reporter at The Washington Post and MSNBC contributor Carol Leonnig, and staff writer for The Atlantic, Tom Nichols. Peter, I'm going to start with you. I want to play what the president had to say at the White House. We're going to wait on this sound. But, you know, the president has suggested that Governor Newsom should potentially be arrested if he tries to block the immigration crackdown. This was after the White House said they're not seriously considering it. But how do you see this all playing out politically for both Democrats, including Newsom, and the White House?
Well, this is a confrontation we've been waiting to see for 4.5 months, right? We knew this president came back into office ready to use the military if he had, any excuse to do so. Governor Newsom has tried to tell protesters in the street not to give President Trump that excuse. But I think both of them find political reasons to stand up for their side at this point. Trump thinks it's a winner for him politically. He thinks it's a sign of his strength to the extent that you just said. It does take away from other issues that aren't as favorable to him, as tariffs and so forth are, according to polls. And for Governor Newsom, who has struggled to find a path for himself in this Trump era, it allows him to be a champion for Democrats standing up to a president that they see as increasingly authoritarian.
And Carol, what is the context or even the precedent for the use of National Guard by President Trump in this case? And then let's also talk about January 6th in contrast.
You know, Christina, I was thinking about an event even before January 6th. It's absolutely true that Donald Trump has been essentially itching to use National Guard at his direction for a host of things, going all the way back to the George Floyd protests outside the White House in 2020. Forgive me, I'm going to blank on my year here. In 2020, in the summer. That painful period of time when the country was reeling from the police murder of George Floyd led a host of protesters to storm and swarm outside the White House, and Donald Trump was taken to his bunker. And I remember reporting at that time, along with the New York Times, we were competing on this story, and Donald Trump was furious that reporters had figured out he had been taken to the bunker, and he emerged that Monday morning to insist to his Attorney General, to his Secretary of Defense, and to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs that he wanted the National Guard out in force and the U.S. military out in force outside the White House, that he was not going to put up with looking weak or having foreign leaders think that he couldn't control his own city and control the public and protesters that were, influencing and making it unattractive for him in the nation's capital, making him look weak. Yeah. He has been wanting to do this, and it is really quite something to do it in the objection and without the request of the governor who controls the National Guard. That is the person who's supposed to be doing this. It is only the president's role to do this under the Insurrection Act, and it's hard to imagine how protesters to an ICE raid outside a hardware store is something that would trigger the Insurrection Act and invoking it.
Tom, you heard Carol talking about this is a president who cares deeply about image, about looking tough. You argue that the president is using the National Guard as bait. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, he's trying to draw the foul. He wants the protesters to become more violent. He wants them to swarm against the cops and the Guard so that he can continue his narrative that America is this country that's suffering a foreign invasion and we're in the midst of chaos and everyone should be afraid and the only person that can save them is a strong man in the White House. I mean, Carol's right. He's been itching to do this for years because he knows that the optics of it, if people will take the bait and charge into the smoke and harass and confront and scream at the cops and the guardsmen, those images will work in his favor with the people that support him and with undecided voters who may just kind of throw up their hands and say things are terrible everywhere. So he's laying this out as bait. He's baiting Newsom and the California government by going over their heads. He's baiting Americans in the streets to confront these people. And he's hoping that the disorder that will come from it will be now the pretext for yet more expansion of his authoritarian power to go get a bigger hammer and to use these in other cities. And I think people should understand this isn't just about Los Angeles. This is a dry run for what he wants to do in a lot of places. And that's why this is really, a crisis and a very crucial moment.
So if you're an organizer, if you're an activist, if you're somebody who wants to go out on the streets and protest the actions of this administration, Tom, what do you do? How do you avoid falling into this kind of public trap? Do you stay home and then appear to not be saying anything? Or do you go out and run the risk of one or two individuals in a crowd of 1,000 giving them the exact images they want?
Well, personally, I'm always distrustful of large gatherings because of the number of people that can absolutely bring down a lot of trouble on the heads of other protesters. On the other hand, it is the most American of rights to peaceably, and I underline peaceably, to peaceably assemble and petition for redress of grievances from the government. When the National Guard has been sent, particularly as this kind of bait, the best thing you can do is stay far away from them. As I said in the piece, what if the president threw a crackdown and nobody came? Because I think that would really undermine a lot of his narrative. And I think a lot of those guardsmen who are Californians who live among these folks would wonder what the hell they're doing there if people aren't violent and if things aren't burning and if there isn't smoke in the sky. So I think it's pretty, it's difficult. We have the right to protest, and this is worth protesting. I'll say that as well, that the president's behavior and the behavior of ICE is well worth protesting. But you really have to be careful not to walk into a trap that's being set specifically to kind of draw people into it and give the president, as I said in the piece, I know people want to show up, but you're not going to be heroes. You're going to become a pretext. And I think that's something that really people should worry about.
And Peter, we do have that sound. So now I want to play what the president had to say at the White House just moments ago. He's at an event with business leaders, and he has this to say during a meeting.
Some of the things you're reading about in Los Angeles, thank goodness we sent out some wonderful National Guard. They've really helped, and a lot of problems they were having out there. They were afraid to do anything, and we sent out the troops, and they've done a fantastic job. So I want to thank them very much.
Peter, I want to get your take, because the lack of due process in some of these deportations was actually getting traction, some traction on both sides of the aisle. Big picture, this clash in L.A., do you think it's going to distract from the focus, from the legality of these deportations and the lack of due process?
Well, it certainly changes the subject to what Donald Trump wants to talk about, right? Which is sanctuary cities, sanctuary states, states that aren't doing enough in his view to help, round up people who are in the country illegally, who are resisting, federal authority. And the question is whether, in fact, the National Guard has actually done anything there. Let's wait for more reporting from the ground before we accept that at face value. I think that there's reports from California have indicated that, yes, there obviously have been some disturbances. There has been some action back and forth, but largely with police officers and federal law enforcement officers. And I'm not sure how much the National Guard has actually been part of that. I'm also not sure how widespread this really is. The president has been using rather apocalyptic terms in his public statements. L.A. has been invaded. L.A. has been occupied. I think if you live in L.A., except for a very few specific locations, you probably don't even know this is going on right now. So it's important to keep that in context, to remember what we're talking about here. Protests, as Tom says, are as American as anything. And sometimes they do get out of control. And that's where governors and mayors step in with law enforcement. The question is whether or not it gets so out of control that they're not able to handle it. That's traditionally when you bring in the National Guard. And that doesn't normally happen at this level or this kind of scale.
And Carol, I want to get your take as well on this allegation from some top Democrats that the events in LA are not only distracting from the core of the due process argument here with deportations, but they're also distracting from things President Trump doesn't want to talk about, including tariffs, Americans potentially losing their health care under the spending bill, or something as unimportant when you look at those other issues as this feud with Elon Musk.
There's been there have been a lot of headlines of late that are unpleasant for Donald Trump. And this sort of visual is really his expertise, to try to get back on Fox News with dangerous, Molotov cocktail throwing protesters and National Guard brought in to save Californians from this danger. I mean, that's not really what's happening here. No doubt there are skirmishes, but that's not what's happening in these images. But that is the image that Donald Trump wants to project, because those other stories have been very painful and very difficult for Donald Trump. And I've often said he's the master of the megaphone. He is always able to grab it and turn the channel essentially to the subject he finds the most compelling and useful to him. The Fox News imagery of immigrants in our streets who are here illegal and are illegally and are so-called bad guys, as the Cabinet Secretary Tom Homan said, but we actually don't know that these people are bad guys. What we know is that they were at a hardware store, probably offering to their work for the day laboring, and the pressure of the White House has been that 3,000 people will be detained every day, and that is some incredible pressure coming down for a quota from the White House that the Customs and Border Patrol and ICE have not yet been able to meet.